In the small morning hours of January 26, 2015, a confused and concerned neighbor called 911, asking for maybe the police in the town of Tyler, Texas. The caller had heard a car crash and perhaps some gunshots. When she looked outside, she saw a red Toyota Camry with its front end having run into a pole. The first responding officer with his body cam activated approached the car. He opened the front door and found the driver unresponsive, still seated in the driver's seat. It was quickly apparent that this was no ordinary car accident. The car was riddled with bullets and covered in blood, as was the driver. It was a strange scene with much, much more to the story. Our 316th episode of California Dreaming is in recognition of Pride Month. This is the tale of the deadly truth about hate, the murder of Ty Underwood. Hello, dreamers, and welcome back to the show. I've been spending most of the month of June trying to get the last parts of the Gannon Stout case done on Patreon, but I encountered some technical difficulties with getting the audio and video files from my phone to my computer and from my computer into an MP3 converter and that MP3 into my audio software, and it was a big pain in the butt. So I'm going to come back to that a little later and put this episode that I've been wanting to do now for a couple of years. And since June is Pride Month, it seems like the right time when nothing else is going right in my little makeshift recording studio, and I use the term studio quite loosely. Before I get started, I have a few notes about the show. This is an independent podcast, which means it is completely subscriber funded, which also means anytime you listen to the show, the only annoying things you're going to hear is me. And there are a number of ways that you can support this podcast. You can join in, subscribe, or follow me on all the social medias. I'm trying to get serious about it myself. In fact, last week, I changed all my apps around on my phone, my home screen on my phone. So before, when I would unlock my phone, my main apps were shopping, food, and games. I moved all of those into little folders in the back, and I moved all the social media and podcast apps to the first page. So join the Facebook group, follow the show's Facebook page. I'm on Instagram, X, and TikTok. There you will get updates about new episodes, and I am starting to realize that I have so much content out there that I'm even forgetting what cases we've covered. So every other day or so, I'm going to try to dive back into the archives and post about older episodes that some of you may not have even realized that we covered. Because, you see, on the 27th of June, which was yesterday actually, but I don't know, I was in a funk and I didn't feel like recording, California Dreaming celebrated its 8th anniversary. There are hundreds of episodes, and even though this is only number 316, there are countless bonuses and, of course, dozens of full-length episodes on Patreon. I don't know exactly how many cases we've covered, but there are hundreds, and I'm proud of most of them. So if you would like us to keep going and you want to keep listening, you can support this show by subscribing to Patreon. I'm going to spend the month of July and August trying to update everything on Patreon and on the regular feed. And when I do, I'll be making like throwback posts, and I'm going to dust off those older episodes for us. And the cost of subscribing is the same as it was almost 8 years ago when we launched. It's $1 a month. And this week, I would like to thank Kim B. in Bountiful, Utah, Laura C. in Corfu, New York, Gabby K., Elizabeth N. in Bourne, Texas, Bjorn, I don't know how to say it, Boerne, Texas, Mallory T. in Yukon Territory, Canada, Jane G. again and again and again, thank you, Jane, Kathleen T. in Atlantic Heights, New Jersey, Anke, it's Anke, I don't know how to say it, in San Jose, California, John R. in Ontario, Canada, Michelle B., Sarah A. in Australia, Michael M. in the UK, and Bridget C. in Fountain Valley, California. Thank you all for either joining Patreon, raising their pledge, or contributing through PayPal or Cash App. Thank you all for your support, and that is all I have for the business this week. Let's get started with today's episode. Ty Underwood was born October 24th, 1990 in Lufkin, Texas. and she was a transgender woman, and her given name being Tyrone. However, she went by Ty. When she was about 23 going on 24 sometime in 2014, Ty decided to leave Lufkin and move to the much bigger city of Tyler, Texas, which is about 2 hours away from Lufkin. Even though it wasn't the biggest move in the world, it was for Ty. It's been said that coming from Lufkin and making that move to Tyler is akin to moving to New York City. And it was going to be a move that would change the trajectory of Ty's life. Texas has not been the most transgender-friendly state in the union, and that's apparent even in recent legislation proposals that would provide less in terms of rights and gender affirmation, which is a whole other issue in and of itself. But today's episode is just about Ty. While there are those who are transgender living in Tyler, Texas, it is my understanding that it's sort of kept quiet. It's not always welcoming, and it's not always safe. Ty, however, lived fearlessly and unapologetically. She wasn't afraid to be who she was. She had a big personality and a big presence. She just wasn't afraid. It was important to Ty that she be able to live her life on her terms to the fullest. And that's exactly what she was doing the evening of Sunday, January 25th, 2015, going into the 26th, when that 911 call from neighbors came into dispatchers in Tyler. The neighbor was able to look out her window, and she saw the car crashed into the pole. The vehicle was still running, its headlights were on, its windshield wipers were wiping. This was the scene when first responders arrived. The 911 caller said she heard the crash, but it was her grandchildren who heard the gunshots. The first officer to respond activated his body cam and approached the car and opened the door. He saw Ty seated in the driver's seat, but not moving. The officer asked her if she was okay, but got no response. And the actual wreck itself wasn't that bad. In fact, it kind of looked like Ty's Camry rolled into the pole at a relatively slow speed. It's not that type of accident that would have produced the amounts of blood that officer initially observed when he approached the vehicle. And he said as much on his body cam, an unusually large amount of blood for the low speed, the low impact of this accident that this appeared to be. On the officer's radio, you can hear someone ask if the driver was injured from the wreck or if the driver was shot, and that's when he said that there was a lot of blood for that type of accident. In fact, in this officer's experience, when people get into car accidents, they usually have blood coming from their face, their nose, they have injuries to their mouth, or some type of bleeding head injury. The officer asked the driver a couple of more questions, if she could hear him, if she's okay, but still received no answers. Soon the officer was able to tell that there was blood coming from the driver's shoulder and wrist. And there was really an excessive amount of blood for that type of impact with a telephone pole. And the injuries were in places on the body that usually don't sustain injuries like that. The driver was also bleeding very heavily from the side of her torso. Upon closer inspection, the first responders realized that the person sitting in the driver's seat had been shot multiple times. Those wounds in the shoulder and wrist, to him, appeared to be impact wounds from gunshots, and that lines up with the report from the 911 caller that gunshots were heard. And a look around the outside of the vehicle revealed a number of bullet holes throughout. Well, actually there was one bullet hole, but there were also bullet holes inside the vehicle. There was also so much blood inside, and all of it had come from the driver. And it was too late for anyone to be able to do anything to save her. She was gone. And they were now looking at more than just a solo car accident. The paramedics did what they could, but ultimately, Ty was pronounced dead at the scene. When investigators and detectives and officers took a closer look at all of the gunshots and all of the bullet holes, everything that had entered the car and Ty's body, in all, the car had been shot at 5 times. 4 out of those 5 bullets struck the driver. The trajectory of the bullets came from the right side of the vehicle to the left towards her. Based on the angle of the bullets, it indicated that whoever it was that fired those shots at the driver was actually seated in the passenger seat of her car. There were some bullet holes on the outside, I believe just one big bullet hole on the passenger side of the car, which meant that the shooter began shooting at the driver while he was seated next to her in the car, and after shooting her at least once, perhaps twice, he exited the vehicle while it was still moving and continued firing into the vehicle from the outside. The evidence revealed that it was likely the driver was shot twice while her killer was sitting next to her, having shot her through the torso, puncturing her lungs. The driver began to try to flee, pressing down on her accelerator while at the same time, the shooter got out of the car and fired 3 more times. We know that as she drove, the driver struggled to breathe as her lungs were collapsing and giving up on her. Based on the evidence at the scene, it appeared as though the shooter chased the car for a short distance on foot while he kept shooting, as he managed to put 2 more bullets into the driver, with the 5th one missing her. This indicated to investigators that whoever it was that shot the driver wanted to make sure that she did not survive. Later on, it would be determined that the driver was Ty Underwood. A journalist with the local paper, The Telegraph, Corey McCoy, did an interview on the Discovery Channel with one of their shows called The Murder Tapes. And this particular show on investigation discovery features a lot of the video and audio evidence from various cases, such as Ty's. And in her case, there is police body cam video, there's interrogations, there's court proceedings that are played for you. And so that's where I got a good amount of first-hand information as it was happening in real time. So this journalist, Corey, when he was given the story, he interviewed people close to Ty who knew her. And of course, they had nothing but good and glowing things to say about the 24-year-old. She was a wonderful friend. She was very caring. She had a big heart and had a lot of love to give. To me, she kind of looked like late singer Aaliyah. And whatever direction Ty was going to go in life, it was her goal to do anything that she could to help or to be of service. She had just gone back to school in order to get into the medical field. It was really important to Ty to do good work for others. So back at this accident, when it all started and the shooting began, Ty did not die right away. She kept trying to drive away while mortally wounded while being shot. She was dying and bleeding out from all of those bullet wounds. The evidence at the scene revealed that Ty had struck some objects with her vehicle. At least one mailbox, there was paint and shattered glass that Ty left behind as she tried to flee her assailant. The evidence also revealed that she even had the wherewithal to put her vehicle into reverse and to turn around and head back towards where the shooting started, ultimately going up into a grassy area, crashing into the pole and coming to rest. The evidence also showed that Ty's tires had been spun out in the muddy grass, meaning she tried to continue to flee, but her vehicle became stuck where it was ultimately found just a few minutes later. Too late for Ty to survive her injuries. She really did try to leave that spot where she got stuck. The wheels were actually dug into the mud pretty deeply, so much so that in one of the photographs I saw her hubcap had come loose and fallen off, most likely as she spun her tires. The scene was brutal and violent, and we can only imagine the fear that Ty was experiencing in those last moments of her life as she tried in vain to save herself. Ty did the best that she could to get away from her killer, but she just didn't make it. The damage that those 4 bullets did to her overwhelmed her, and she died where her car came to rest. So, it's clear how Ty Underwood died. What the investigators needed to find out next is who wanted her dead, and why. It was dark out, so things were a little bit difficult to see in those pre-dawn hours of that early morning. But what the investigators really wanted to know is where the whole entire encounter Ty had with her killer had begun. Where did all of this originate from, and what path of travel did that car take before it came to rest after striking that pole and getting stuck in the mud? There were questions that needed to be answered, like, was there another vehicle involved? Was the shooter known to the victim? Was the shooter in the car with her, or had he been chasing her? how did all of this play out and end like this? The only thing that was certain was that they had a homicide on their hands. It was also at the scene when they ran the temporary tag that Ty had on her car and that it was registered to a person named Tyrone Underwood. And it wasn't long before they put it together that she was Tyrone and that she was, in fact, a transgender woman. After the scene was secured, investigators began searching the area for evidence. And one of the things that they found was the passenger side rearview mirror had broken off and was laying on the ground. As Ty attempted to drive away from her killer, she struck a brick mailbox, and that is what knocked her mirror off. All that, along with some shell casings, were found about 100 yards away from where Ty's car came to a stop. And even next to the shell casings were some flakes of red paint that matched the color of Ty's car. So because Ty had driven quite some distance, the crime scene turned out to be bigger than the average homicide involving a shooting. So they decided to split the scene into sections and have different officers search specific areas to make sure that they didn't miss anything important. Another police officer was tasked with going door to door to interview neighbors and potential witnesses. Though not everybody was answering that door at that hour, they managed to talk to a few people. And one of the people they were able to talk to was the 911 caller, and she basically repeated what she said on the recording to the dispatcher, that her grandchildren were the ones who woke her up after they told her they heard gunshots, and when she looked out the window, she saw the car crashed into the pole. Beyond that, the 911 caller didn't see anything that could help further the investigation at that point. She only saw the aftermath. The detectives and the first responders were also able to determine at the scene that only one bullet actually struck Ty's car on the outside, despite the fact that she was shot 4 times, which indicated to the officers at the scene that it was likely the person who shot her was in the car with her or standing outside the vehicle while the door was open. They shot at her and struck her, and then Ty began to pull away, and her attacker continued to shoot, striking the car on the outside 1 time, causing 1 large bullet hole and actually pretty large chunks of the red paint to chip off and land on the ground. They found people who said that they heard the gunshots. They had ear witnesses, but nobody was an actual eyewitness to the shooting. So the scene itself was quite perplexing for these first responders as they tried to figure out what the heck happened on the street at this early hour of the morning. Because there was money in the center console of Ty's car, it was obvious that robbery wasn't the motive. Her phone was sitting there too. So they ruled that out early on. One of the first things responders took note of was the fact that when they arrived at the scene, they could hear music coming from the car. It was later on that they realized it was Ty's cell phone that was playing music, so eventually her phone battery died and her phone shut down. And we know that phone could potentially be a treasure trove of evidence in determining who it was she was in communication with leading up to her death. It was kind of looking like Ty knew her killer, considering he was seated next to her in the passenger seat, but they couldn't jump to that conclusion just based on what they had at that time. Getting the phone to power back on wasn't the problem. It was getting the passcode that was going to be the next issue facing investigators. Ty had an iPhone, and we know it is notoriously difficult to get into someone's iPhone. And if you try too much or too frequently, one could inadvertently delete all the data in that phone and lose it forever. So getting into Ty's phone wasn't going to be something that they were going to be able to do right away, but they're going to be working on it for sure. Investigators were aware that they'd only be able to guess a few times before they'd be locked out of the phone or lose everything on it. So in the meantime, investigators found some small pieces of mail inside Ty's car, which provided them with her home address. And it is a home that she shared with her roommate, Kenya. The detectives showed up at Kenya's door later on that morning to inform her that Ty was found dead behind the wheel of her vehicle. They knocked and identified themselves as being with the Tyler Police Department. Kenya asked them what they were there for. They came inside and they had a few questions. If she knew Tyrone, and Kenya said she did. Did she know where Tyrone was supposed to be at that morning? And Kenya said that she's at school. This all happened started on a Sunday, going into a Monday. It was the end of January, so the spring semester or quarter had just started. Monday, they had classes. She was supposed to be there. Her roommate assumed that that's where she was at. The officer asked what kind of car Ty drove. Kenya said a Camry. He asked if it was red. She said yes. So the officer broke the news. Something happened early that morning. They don't know everything that has happened, but Ty was killed early that morning. Kenya immediately became emotional and very upset. She said, "My friend is dead?" "Yes, ma'am. He was shot." The officers throughout are going to refer to Ty as he, so when I'm quoting, I'm going to just say what they say. But for the most part throughout this episode, Ty will be identified as she, her. Kenya cried, "Please tell me you're playing. Tell me the truth." And the officer apologetically said, "That's what happened. I'm sorry. This is the truth. I wouldn't come over here and play like that." The officer wanted to know if there was any family members that needed to be contacted, but Kenya continued to sob. She continued to ask what happened, still hoping that the cop was somehow playing a cruel joke on her. Still inside the house that Kenya shared with Ty and being recorded on this officer's body cam, the officer told Kenya that they were trying to figure out what happened to her friend and who did it. Kenya said that Ty moved to Tyler, and she admitted to this officer that she begged Ty to move there with her to get out of that small hometown of theirs, Lufkin. She said that they had been best friends since second grade. And at the same time that they're going over there to inform Kenya, they also had to consider what Kenya might know or if she might have been involved. But her reaction to the news that Ty was dead was so deeply emotional and so visceral that the officers just about right away stopped suspecting that Kenya had anything to do with this. Kenya's reaction to the news was raw and very real. Even watching it on police body cam, they don't show her face, but you don't even have to see her to know how much this news devastated her. Kenya was, however, a valuable source of information since she and Ty were together all the time. They lived together. They're best friends. Kenya is the person that these investigators are going to need and want to talk to more in depth. For starters, the detectives wanted to know why Ty was out and about at that early hour on a Monday morning when she had to be in class later on. Asking Kenya more questions in the kitchen, they asked about who Ty may have been talking to or who she was with or why she was there. Immediately, Kenya said, "Get me Ty's phone and I'll be able to tell you everything." They told her they're working on getting into her phone, but could she come down to the station and talk to them further on the record? Kenya agreed, so she went down for further questioning. And so it would be later on that same day that they asked Kenya to come down to the police station to give that statement. The detective asked what Ty was doing out there at that time of the morning. Kenya said that she could have been there to meet a friend, someone who was a student at that school, and she's talking about Tyler College. The detective asked if these people that Ty was going out to meet like this, did they know that she's a man? Kenya intimated that they did, and she said, quote, "It's something that we do because we had a friend a couple years back. He kind of dressed like us and stuff like that, and either the dudes didn't know or they knew but didn't want nobody else to know. Well, some females found out, and the dude was walking home to his grandmother's house one night, and the dude he was fooling with were in a truck, and they were drunk, and they jumped out on him and beat him with a crowbar and a baseball bat and then shot him in the head. And so we made a pact that we will not meet any man without him knowing the truth." And it was during this interview with investigators that Kenya provided them with the name of the most recent person that she knew of Ty being actively involved with. The detective said, "Do you know any of Ty's friends?" And Kenya said, "The last one that I knew of was this dude named Carlton." The detective asked where Carlton lived, but she didn't know. He asked if she ever saw him, and she said she caught a glimpse of him one time when he came inside their apartment. He asked how long Ty had been seeing Carlton, and Kenya indicated that Carlton had been coming around their apartment for only about 2 weeks and that Ty had met him on Plenty of Fish, that dating app or website. The detective asked if there was anybody new or different, and Kenya said, "I'm telling you, if we can get into that phone, you'll know who she went and saw last night." But one of the most critical pieces of information Kenya was able to share with detectives was the fact that the only person that she knew Ty would leave at that time of night to go see would be Carlton. Ty was relatively new to Tyler. She didn't know all that many people, and she didn't really make a habit of leaving or being out that late hour. Kenya was certain Carlton would be the only person Ty would be willing to see at that time. So, who is this Carlton person? Well, his name is Carlton Ray Champion Jr. He was a little bit younger than Ty was. At the time, Carlton was 21 years old. But even though he was 21, he was only a freshman at nearby Texas College. Oh, did I say Tyler College earlier? I meant to say Texas College. Right away, I see red flags when I see that the guy was 21 and a freshman. But that's just my judgy side being judgy. As for Texas College, it's a private, historically Black Christian school founded in 1894 by Christian Methodist Episcopal ministers with the goal of providing education for African American students who were segregated out of attending traditional colleges in Texas at the time. Carlton was said to have had a pretty rough upbringing, and he found himself in trouble often as a kid and as a teenager, which might explain why he was only a freshman in school at the age of 21. By that time, I guess Carlton had decided to try and straighten out his life, and part of that involved enrolling in school at Texas College. And, he decided to try out for the school's football team. And I guess being a freshman and being 21 years old, that would give him somewhat of an advantage over those incoming freshmen who are just out of high school. Well, Carlton made the team and was considered to be a promising and talented football player. And being a college football player in that town, well, in that area in general, like in the South, it makes you kind of a big deal. College football is a huge deal. And if you're on the team, then you kind of just automatically become popular and idolized, especially if you stand out. And the smaller the college, the bigger the deal is made about its athletes. And being one of the smaller schools, this propelled Carlton into being somewhat of a big man on campus. And I'm saying sort of and somewhat a lot because I can't help but feel like this guy was bigger in his own mind than he was to anybody else. But he may have been a standout player. I didn't really care, so I didn't look it up. But because he was a troublemaker when he was young, I always feel like there's a part of that person that they used to be that they carry with them. You know what I mean? Like if a person has been capable of making poor decisions or impulsive choices in life, there's always going to be that side of them that we know is capable of doing certain things and acting certain ways. Not that they aren't capable of change. It's just still a part of who they inherently are. Like a leopard doesn't change its spots, But for the most part, I guess Carlton was trying to put that behind him and sort of reinvent himself in school. And right from the jump, as soon as I heard this case a few years back, I could tell right away this guy was full of himself. And that statement only scratches the surface of what an asshole this guy is. Well, since he was the one person that Ty's friend Kenya had named, they were going to bring him in for questioning. And they weren't just going to ask him to come in, and he came in. He was detained and brought in pretty much involuntarily from what it looked like. I can't even begin to tell you what a piece of shit this guy is, which is the main reason why this case, out of all the many crimes against the LGBTQ plus community in Texas that could be told, this one really stands out because of this man's attitude. I think he was brought in handcuffs because of his criminal past. I found out later on as I researched this case that he was actually on probation, so they were going to take their precautions, and they kept him in handcuffs for most of the interrogation. But I have this feeling that even if they did call him up and say, hey, can you come down to the police station? We have some question to ask. I don't think he would have shown up. They probably would have had to gone down and get him anyway. So when Carlton was asked about his association with Ty, he said he only met her once, and that was a lie. When they discussed Ty's lifestyle or her gender identity, Carlton acted surprised to learn that she was transgender. He said that he had no idea, that he had thought she was female. That's a lie. Carlton also said that the only vehicle he knew Ty to drive was a white vehicle and insisted that he had never been inside her car. Her car was red and he had been inside of it, so more lies. When he was asked about what the main form of communication he used to call or text with Ty, he said that they used an app called Kik, a messaging and chat app, but he also admitted that earlier that morning, he actually deleted the app from his tablet and his phone. So, consciousness of guilt, more lies, more bullshit. This raised eyebrows because the information that they had was Carlton was dating Ty, and the only way that they communicated was through Kik, and it just so happened he deleted it the same morning that she was found dead. So now that Carlton had deleted the app and all the data along with it, the only way that detectives were going to be able to see the conversations between the two of them was to get into Ty's phone, to get past her passcode and lock screen and directly to the data that she has in her Kik app. Because once they do, they know that they're going to find more lies from Carlton Champion. Another friend that interacted with Ty prior to the murder actually loaned her some money. Ty had texted this friend asking for a favor. Can she borrow $200 until she gets her financial aid money on February 11th, which was about 2 weeks after her murder. This friend agreed and they met up earlier in the day that she was killed. She loaned Ty the money, they hugged, they said their goodbyes, and that was that. Ty didn't tell this woman, this friend of hers, what she needed the money for, so police wondered if there was an angle to that bit of information. Was there somebody that Ty was indebted to that might have been angry about it, that wanted to be paid back? But we know that this wasn't a robbery and that there was still money in her car. Could it be that Ty was making a purchase, buying something from someone, and this is where they were going to meet, and this all went bad from there? But another key bit of information this other friend provided was when she asked if she knew of any guys that Ty was meeting or interested in, this friend that loaned her the $200 told the detectives that she understood Ty to have a boyfriend who was a student at Texas College, and that corroborated with what Kenya had said. And this actually happened, the incident, the killing, not too far from the campus. This friend did not know his name, but she knew that he played football. So that was a big deal. They're finding out that this, in Ty's mind at least, was a pretty serious relationship with Carlton. And this Texas College student football player was someone she referred to as her boyfriend. So this was a major lead for the investigation. They decided that they needed to go pay a visit to Texas College. We'll get back to Carlton in a moment. Let's talk about Ty's cell phone. So the good thing was, fortunately, at the time, the iPhone passcode was only 4 numbers. They tried a few combinations. They had a certain number of tries before they'd be locked out of Ty's phone for good. And one of the 4-digit combinations that they attempted was Ty's birth month and day, and that worked. And with that, they were able to see all of Ty's communications, including all of her activity and messages on the Kik app. I will get back to that in a minute as well, but I just wanted you to know that they did get into Ty's phone relatively quickly, much quicker than they did in the Murdaugh case. Remember that? The victim, the son, what was his name? Paul Murdaugh. He had that video on his phone that was taken just minutes before he was shot to death. And you hear his dad's voice on the audio recording because he was sending a Snapchat of the black Labrador to his friend. It captured his dad's voice when he had denied being by the kennels. And that was kind of like, I think he would have gotten convicted anyway. But that audio recording of him being at the kennels, just like really minutes, 4 or 5 minutes before they were shot, was incredible. It was one of my favorite moments in true crime. But anyway, another thing that they saw on the phone was that there was yet another person that Ty had been texting with, another guy that piqued investigators' interest. Now, I watched 2 different shows about this, one on YouTube and one on Discovery Plus. And the Discovery Plus episode, I believe, used aliases in talking about some of the people. So I wasn't quite sure if there were 2 different people being talked about or just one, but I think they questioned at least 2 other people that Ty had been conversating with in the time leading up to her death. They got the number off of Ty's phone, and the show that I watched on Investigation Discovery, they called him Dalton Howard. But from what I can see, like I said, I suspect that's an alias because they referred to Kenya as Brianna in the episode. So, like I said, I'm not really sure if this man had been mentioned or once or twice or if there's 2 different people. I think they're one and the same, but they visited this guy. They called him Dalton Howard. I believe his real name is George. And they went to his house, visited him on body cam as well, and he was also brought down to the station for questioning. But first, they called Dalton Howard up, and the detectives said that they were investigating a case, and they asked him if he knew someone named Tyrone Underwood. The first thing Dalton said was, "Who's that? I never heard that name before." The call, of course, was really as unexpected as it should be. It's not every day you pick up the phone and law enforcement has questions for you about someone you may or may not know having been murdered. So Dalton at first said that he didn't think he knew who the person was that they were discussing. So what they did was they decided to pay Dalton a visit in person because they weren't sure if this guy was being honest about whether or not he knew Ty as Tyrone. So they showed up and pretty much peppered him with questions regarding Ty's murder. Dalton invited them in, and that's when they showed him a picture of Ty, informing Dalton that Ty had been murdered. They asked him to take a good look. Does he know Ty Underwood? At first, he seemed kind of confused, and he goes, do you got another picture? Is that person the person that died? And the officer said, yeah. And I guess my question is there any reason that you may have been calling him or he may have been calling you? And then Dalton asks, is there a possibility that I may have thought that that was a female at one point, if you understand what I mean? And the detective replied, yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the picture and at first glance, I'm thinking that's a woman. And Dalton replied, that's possibly could be it. That person is dead? And the officer said, yep, that person is dead. And Dalton said, damn. They asked him, how did you meet him? And Dalton said, I think it might have been on a website, some type of website. Do you know which one it was? And Dalton replied, POF, which is plenty of fish. The detective then asked when you met up the other night, but Dalton interrupted this officer's question and said, we never did. You never met up? No. So there were plans to meet up, but you never did? Dalton seemed to get a little bit defensive, and he replied, I never went to South Tyler. And the detective assured him he understood, but wondered if Ty came to Dalton's place, and Dalton said, no, sir. And based on the conversation and Dalton's demeanor, they believed him to be telling the truth. They had met on Plenty of Fish, but it never got to the point where they actually met up in person. But investigators are still taking everything with a grain of salt at this point because they don't know for sure. This is them doing their due diligence. They have a prime person of interest from the very beginning when Kenya dropped Carlton's name just hours after Ty's murder when detectives showed up at her door. Dalton also offered up his phone and his phone number so they could take a look at their message exchanges and whatnot. And we all should be really comfortable with handing over our phones if we're not doing anything wrong, right? I've reached this point in my own life where I feel like I should be able to hand my phone over to my daughter or my significant other or even the police without worrying about what's in there. I watched this one video on Facebook, and it was this guy going around asking couples to unlock and swap their phones with their significant other for 1 minute. And the guy very, very quickly said, that'll be a no. And when he said that into the camera, the girl's face just went from happy go Skippy to what the fuck in less than a second. But then as soon as Dalton went for his phone, he suddenly remembered that he had deleted the conversation. And I've been on dating app like within the last couple years a few times. And if I have a conversation I don't like, I delete it. So the detectives were kind of like, sure, okay. But I believe this guy, like I said, was brought up in the YouTube program. I think his name is fictitious. I don't think it's Dalton. I do think it's George. And I'll finish up telling you what ended up happening after he came down to meet with detectives at the police station in just a little bit. I'm sorry I'm skipping around, but I was watching 2 different TV shows. So I was going back and forth and trying to put my notes together for this episode. That's why it seems a little clusterfucky, but sorry about that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the messages between Carlton and Ty. They were there for everyone to see. There were text messages that Ty and Carlton had exchanged on Kik, and it was obvious that they were in a relationship, and that relationship was in fact intimate and sexual. The conversations were sexual, intimate photos were exchanged, and it also became clear to investigators, based on the nature of their messages, that Ty had at some point revealed that she was transgender. I don't know how far along into the messages all this happened, but as Carlton Champion sat in that interrogation room denying knowing that Ty was a transgender woman, those messages completely contradicted that statement. So there was yet another lie. And as they got to scrolling down to the evening and the morning of Ty's murder, the messages grew increasingly dark and ominous. The messages from Ty to Carlton were accusatory in nature. She suspected he was messaging with other women for hookups or whatever, and based on the tone of her messages, Ty was pretty angry about it, and it got to the point where she said that she was coming over to see him in person. She texted, "I'm coming to the school," and the show that I watched on YouTube said that Carlton texted back in all caps, "No, you're not." But on the Investigation Discovery episode, he seemed to eventually agree to her coming over. I'll get to that a little bit later on too, but based on other text messages that Ty received from Carlton, he was not only aware that Ty was transgender, but he was interested in continuing to see Ty. He just wanted to keep their relationship a secret. Who did he want to keep his relationship with Ty a secret from? Well, that can only be speculated because I believe to this day, Carlton Champion has continued to deny involvement in Ty's death. But it seems as though he didn't want what was going on with Ty to become public amongst his friends and his teammates. Ty's last message to Carlton read, "I'm here." And with that, it puts Ty and Carlton together right before Ty was shot to death. The information investigators got out of Ty's phone was all they really needed to be convinced of Carlton's involvement in her murder. So the detectives made their way to Texas College and they brought Carlton in for questioning. They served a warrant and then later on detained him and brought him in for questioning. One of the first things they asked him is if he knew a woman named Ty. He said that he used to text someone on Kik named that and admitted that they were supposed to meet up the night before. Carlton said, "We were supposed to meet up last night, but I guess I don't know why, but she never texted me back, so I fell asleep." The detective said, "You were supposed to meet up with her last night?" Carlton replied, "Yes, sir." "How did she text you?" Kik. I had a Kik on her, but she didn't." "That's an app?" "Yeah." "Can we look at it?" "Yeah, actually, I reset my phone." "You reset your phone?" "Yeah, earlier." "Today?" "Yeah, I had deleted a lot of stuff because it took up space on my phone." So, yeah. The red flags were flying as Carlton admitted to deleting things from his phone, but that's still a far cry from murdering someone. Another one of the things detective asked Carlton was, "You stayed the night with her, hadn't you?" And Carlton said, "Nah, I never stayed the night with her. Nuh-uh. First night, like last night, she told me, I was like, I'm fixing to come up to meet you now." And I was like, "Well, you better hurry up before I go to sleep." I never spent the night with her though. "What time was that?" I think it was around 11. I had just gotten back from Dallas." "You ever rode in her car?" Nah." and you just met her within the last week. Yeah, really like 2 weeks ago. You ever had sex with her? No, not at all. Never at all. So that was going to be Carlton's story. Never slept with her, never got into her car. He fell asleep before they ever had a chance to meet up the night she was killed. But the fact that he admitted to having plans to meet up with her was enough to keep him in the sights of the investigation. They started to think that maybe Carlton was feeling awkward or self-conscious about the word getting out that Ty was a transgender woman. The fact that she was murdered and that there were people who knew that they were seeing each other, it was making Carlton a little nervous. And perhaps he's lying to be evasive out of embarrassment or trying to save face with his friends and teammates or whatever. The murder of a transgender woman taking place in that close a proximity to a college campus was big news, and it was spreading pretty quickly. But yeah, that was going to be his story. He flat out denied ever meeting up with Ty that night. He denied ever leaving his dorm. In the meantime, Ty's phone revealed that she was not only seeing Ty, but she was seeing that other guy, George. And this was what the name I got from the YouTube video, and I'm pretty sure it's the same guy as Dalton Howard I had just talked about a minute ago. They called him George. I think his real name is George, but in the investigation discovery, they called him Dalton. Their stories sounded really similar, and it's like those fictitious names that I talked about earlier. So that being said, I wanted to also mention that Ty had been getting mad at Carlton for texting with other women, but Ty is not exactly being exclusive to Carlton either, so I'm not really sure why she got so huffy and puffy about him and what he was doing when she was kind of doing the same thing. So there's that aspect of this case too, but it also means that there might possibly be other suspects. George or Dalton didn't live very far from the location where Ty was murdered either, so they did have to make sure they cleared him. He did get dragged in for an interview as well. After I told you they spoke at his house, they asked him to come in for more questioning. And they questioned him for about 2 hours. They put a lot of pressure on him too. You can see in some of the video footage on Investigation Discovery and on the YouTube video, he is slumped over, he's exhausted, he's worn out from the questioning. He explained that they tried to work out the logistics of him going to where Ty lived or Ty coming over to where he lived, but it just wasn't working out. All this was happening the same day that Ty made plans to meet up with Carlton. So when they finally settled on meeting up and it didn't work out and just kind of basically sounded like everyone was just too lazy to actually go and show up to meet. And to be honest, from the things that George or Dalton was saying in the interrogation room, it sounded like neither him nor Ty wanted to go through the hassle or the trouble. They didn't seem all that into each other, or like I said, they were just lazy. And this all apparently happened. They met the same day on Plenty of Fish, that very day. So this guy happened to get caught up on the day that she was killed. The last text messages that Ty exchanged with Dalton/George were only a couple hours before she was murdered, but nothing in those messages indicated that they had any plans to meet up that night, nor did those plans ever follow through like they had with her messages to Carlton. So based on George's/Dalton's statements and the evidence that they had on whatever social media app that they were communicating on, they never met in person. He had told the detectives questioning him that they talked and texted. He realized that things weren't really going anywhere, and he went ahead and deleted his chat with her sometime prior to the time she died, maybe right after they talked. But the detectives still leaned in hard with their suspicions to a point where George/Dalton actually had to offer to take a polygraph to clear his name. They called his bluff. They connected him up to the lie detector test, and with that, along with all the digital evidence, they ultimately cleared him. So the investigation refocused back onto Carlton Champion. However, Carlton continued to insist that he was in his dorm room the whole entire night after he got back from Dallas. He said he got back around 9:30 and that he stayed in his dorm the entire night all the way to the next morning. But Carlton apparently forgot about those ever-present surveillance cameras. You know, those things that they have that take video footage of you when you're coming and going from places. Yeah, they have this stuff called video footage and everything that was happening inside the lobby of the dorm. This isn't the 90s anymore. This is 2015. Cameras were everywhere at that point. And sure as shit, as soon as investigators got their hands on the footage from the housing unit Carlton lived in and scoured several hours of footage, they caught him in more lies. Surveillance in the lobby of his dorm building captured him leaving just before Ty was murdered. And then, what do you know? He returned back to his dorm right after Ty was shot and left for dead in the driver's seat of her car. While investigators are the first to admit that the window of time for Carlton to have been there with Ty at the time of her murder is very slim, it just so happened to be surrounding that exact time that she was killed. It was very close by to the dorms where he lived, and it was just barely enough time for him to go there and come back. Of all the windows of time for him to slip in and out of his dorm, it did in fact happen in the exact same window of time that Ty was shot and killed. So the detectives pressured him. If we look at the video, it's going to show you coming into the dorm at 9:30. Yep, he said, by 9:30. And you never left the dorm again. Nope. Yeah, all of that they were able to disprove. At some point, the detective said to Carlton, Tyrone was shot and killed this morning. Carlton's only reaction was, damn. The detective said, right down the street from here. Damn, that's kind of crazy. I don't know why y'all would think I don't know. People can vouch for me. If I did something like that, I would turn myself in. My conscience would just bother me. I don't do nothing like that. Eventually, they asked Carlton to voluntarily provide them with a DNA swab, but he wasn't willing to do that. Carlton said, swab of my DNA? Yeah. What's the point of all this, though? Because your DNA wouldn't be in her car. We have a lot of evidence in the car, and if your DNA doesn't show up in that car, then good. Ultimately, he would refuse. However, they would get a search warrant for his swabbings, and yeah, you know where all that's going to go. When the investigators had shown up at Carlton's dorm room, they informed him that they were in the process of getting a search warrant for his place, but asked him if he wanted, he could give his consent to the search to just move things along. But Carlton said he'd rather wait for the warrant. They've already caught him in some lies, and they've unlocked Ty's phone, and they've eliminated other suspects. And when they questioned Carlton about the information they found in the texting exchange, Carlton actually tried to say that he never texted her after he told Ty that he was about to fall asleep. He said after that, his phone died and he put it on the charger and went to bed. So they were like, what you're saying is that after your phone died and you went to bed, you never texted him again. And he said he did not text him anymore that night. After that, he was adamant, no, sir, I did not. Well, you could clearly see on the app that they continued to text all the way up until minutes before Ty was killed. So investigators asked Carlton, using information that they got directly from Ty's phone, they said, okay, so when would you have texted that you were meeting her up on 25th Street? Carlton replied, I never texted that. But they're sitting there with Ty's phone in their hand in an evidence bag. Right there is a message from Carlton saying to Ty to meet him on 25th. They told Carlton, like, look, we have more information than we had earlier when we talked to you. We've unlocked Ty's phone. We've gone through her phone. We've gone through her Kick app. You know, the app where she's talking to you, and you told Ty to meet you on 25th Street. But Carlton stuck to his guns. No, I didn't. I never said that. And the detective was like, it's right here. This message came from you. And he's like showing him the phone to his stupid face. But Carlton kept insisting, I never said that. I never said that, sir. The detective said, here, let me show it to you. That's why we're here. Let us show you, and then you can explain it to us. Carlton started to get a little defensive and said, look, I don't want to go to the station with you. I don't want to go back. The detective informed Carlton, it ain't just gonna go away, dude. You can't just wish it all go away and everything's good. Carlton started getting a little bit more amped up and said, I know it's not, but I don't see the reason why I gotta talk to y'all. And the detective quickly replied, well, did you kill him? Carlton quickly said, no. What the fuck? Why would I kill somebody? And then the detective said something I thought was kind of funny, but kind of serious at the same time. He said, then start acting like you didn't kill him then. Insinuating that Carlton is, in fact, acting like he did kill him, and it's probably because he did. So getting back to the search of Carlton's dorm, they asked him, what were you wearing on Sunday? And this is, I believe, body cam footage, audio that we're listening to on the Investigation Discovery episode. They asked him, what were you wearing on Sunday? And Carlton replied, what was I wearing? When I came back, I had on some True Religion jeans. Where are they at? And from here, you can hear the detectives order Carlton to stop, to not touch anything, as I think he started to try to reach for whatever jeans he was talking about. And he said, yeah, I had some True Religion jeans on and a red shirt. They also wanted to take the shoes he had on at the time, telling him if he had those shoes on Sunday night, we need those shoes. Carlton replied, man. And the detective goes, is there any blood on any of this stuff? And Carlton goes, blood? Man, come on, man. Why are you all harassing me like an asshole? The detective said, it's only a question. Carlton said, it's making me mad though. Y'all coming at me on some stupid stuff. Y'all need to get the right guy. Y'all got the wrong guy. That's what I'm telling you. I'm done talking. The detective said, but you texted the dead person that you killed. Carlton replied, who the fuck? I ain't killed nobody. Now I'm done talking to you, bro. The detective said, they were killed on 24th Street. Explain that to me. Carlton said, well, you think that? Well, all right. Yeah, and if you don't explain it to us? And Carlton said, I already explained myself to you. And the detective said, they're going to charge you with murder. But in the end, Carlton would never admit to anything in all the talking and complaining. In fact, Carlton is going to act like an asshole about this entire situation throughout this entire investigation. And he never really stopped being an asshole from beginning to end. So let's talk about now, dreamers, what investigators would eventually find in terms of digital evidence related to Carlton and Ty's communications. One of the things investigators did when they got Ty's phone unlocked was they put it in airplane mode in order to maintain the integrity of any important evidence that the phone may hold. At some point, they turned airplane mode off and suddenly they started getting all kinds of notifications coming through the Kick app, especially they were interested in. As they scrolled through the messages, that's when they saw Ty and Carlton had been texting in the hours and minutes leading up to Ty being shot to death. There were still messages being sent and received between Ty and Carlton past 2 in the morning, even just minutes before the shooting. Remember, Ty sent a message that said, I'm here. I had mentioned earlier that Carlton at some point had said, no, you're not, but Ty went anyway. They agreed. It came to an agreement. They both knew that Ty was going over there. Carlton told her where to go. And all of this stemmed from Ty being upset about her suspicions of Carlton still being on the Kick app, and that Carlton was making up excuses and coming up with stories that he was smoking with a friend, his Wi-Fi is tripping, his tablet is dying, he's tired, he has class in the morning, he'll spend the night the next night. He promises things to Ty, but Ty is calling BS, asking where he was at 11 p.m. And Ty was actually the one using profanity, telling him to F you while Carlton is telling her to chill. Ty was the one that was becoming increasingly upset, and I think Carlton was getting frustrated with it. Ty brought up him being on Plenty of Fish still, and Ty, like I said, Ty was doing the same thing. So I don't even know why she felt justified in behaving this way with Carlton to begin with. It does seem like Carlton was just trying to placate Ty, but Ty just thinks that Carlton is lying to her. Eventually, Ty gets fed up and says she's coming, and Carlton directs her where to go. In the messages, Ty said that she was coming. Where is Carlton going to be at? And Carlton said to meet him on the back street. And Ty asked, what's the name of it? Carlton said 25th Street. Ty said she was on her way. At 2:06 a.m., Carlton texted, where you at? Ty replied on MLK, want me to come to the school? Carlton said he was about to start walking. So Carlton made his way to the scene of the shooting on foot. There was a lot of misinformation, by the way. The show that I watched on YouTube was Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen, and they got some of the facts wrong or mixed up or misconstrued. That's why this episode I'm making for you is kind of all over the place. Normally I look at court documents and trials and interrogations, but when you watch stuff on YouTube, you kind of get bits and pieces from all over the place, and this is what you get, kind of a mishmash of information. But for the most part, the story ends the same way, unfortunately. One of the things that stood out to the detectives during this questioning of Carlton Champion was when they told him Ty was shot to death, he quickly jumped to the fact that he had nothing to do with it and that other people would vouch for him. He adamantly denied that he had anything to do with the shooting, even though he's fessed up to having plans to meet up with her that very night. The detectives were put off by the fact that Ty had little to no reaction to the news that Ty was killed. However, for a character like Carlton Champion, that wouldn't surprise me either way. This guy is really off, so his lack of reaction wouldn't really move me here nor there. Considering he's only known Ty for a short period of time, those were the red flags for them, for the investigators on this case, but not so much for me. Any person who doesn't give two shits about anybody else but themselves really isn't going to have that much of a reaction to the news that somebody was killed. So, like I said, this doesn't move me either way. And if Carlton wasn't already telling the dumbest lies ever, he was caught in yet another one. And I mean, we've had our fair share of liars recently, but liars that we've talked about in the past in recent episodes are sort of in a class of their own. We've covered Teresa Stone, Leticia Stout, Sherry Papini. I mean, they take lying to like another level. Like they practice and this is like a sport for them. This guy Carlton is just telling lies that are so simple to disprove that he's either really lazy at lying or he thinks that detectives are really lazy at verifying evidence and facts. Or Carlton is really that stupid, or he thinks the detectives are that stupid. Either way, Carlton told the investigators that he was never inside Ty's car, yet when they processed her vehicle, Carlton's DNA was found on the seatbelt and inside the door handle. So yeah, he had his DNA on the frickin' seatbelt. He's got to make sure he's following those laws, right? Buckling up before you murder somebody. Safety first, right? What a dumbass. He literally showed up to kill Ty, got into her car, and put on his seatbelt. Dumb, and left his DNA on the seatbelt. So stupid. So, like I was saying earlier, investigators had been asking Carlton questions during the time that they were executing the search warrant of his dorm, and some of that conversation was captured on body cam video. And it was during that time that Carlton spent most of the time denying that he sent messages, denying to arrange to meet Ty that night that she was murdered, even though they had unlocked her phone and had the messages right there in black and white. I think they had the phone back at the police station at the time, so they weren't going to confront him with the phone there at the scene of the search, but they would show it to him during his interrogation. And they told him, we know what your username is on Kik. And they tell it to him, but they bleeped it out on the show. But when they told him, this is what you go by on Kik, Carlton said, no, I don't. When it's clear, that's exactly what he goes by. And they're telling him, we've got your Kik account right here, your username linked to your phone, and it says Carlton Champion. That's you. No, it's not. So he's actually basically denying that he's Carlton, even though he's Carlton. Investigators went about their business anyway with the search of his dorm room. And if Carlton Champion is the first place champion of being stupid, like we know he is, then they've probably collected a lot of good stuff to use against him in terms of evidence. Just like all of those messages that Carlton said weren't his when they're shown in Ty's phone to be exactly that, his. And yeah, this is my dorm and I'm the only one who lives here and I'm the only one seen on camera coming and going from my room. But this incriminating evidence that you're finding that links me to the crime, yeah, that's not my stuff. I wasn't there. Even though it's my stuff, it's not my stuff. So let's see what they got from his dorm. One of the things that they seized was a hunting camouflage jacket. Interesting choice of clothing, right? That might be something that you would want to wear when you go shooting, like animals, not people. Yet that's what Carlton was seen wearing as he came and went from his dorm, as captured on surveillance video. They got that very jacket that's seen on the video. They also seized a red Nike t-shirt with the words "Just Do It" on it. Again, that's appropriate attire to go out and murder in, I guess. He also had the absolute douchiest douchebag True Religion jeans that should have died 5 years before Ty did. I mean, extra years needed to be added for crimes of fashion, honestly, in this case. However, I am pretty sure that there will be some kind of ass twat on the Vegas Strip tonight wearing these True Religion jeans still, if I know my lost vegans. Investigators also collected a pair of red and black sneakers. I believe they took the clothing that Carlton himself admitted to have been wearing the night that he got back to his dorm from Dallas. Though he claimed to have never left again, we all know that he did, as they had him on video leaving a little bit after 2 a.m. and then arriving back shortly after the shooting. And you can see in that video footage the most recognizable thing that they collected from his dorm, that hunting camo jacket. The irony of it. Wearing a jacket that's supposed to hide you ends up being the big giveaway. The time that elapsed between the time Carlton left the dorm to the time he came back was only 20 minutes. That's all the time he took to cause so much hurt and devastation. 20 minutes. All of 20 minutes to end Ty's life, just because Carlton was too insecure about his manhood. And we really couldn't understand what it means to be a part of a community that is suddenly faced with this unknown fear. This killing, this murder of a transgender woman, it just hits differently, especially for those who are a part of that community. But it really had the city of Tyler, Texas on edge. And also people were angry. I do have to admit that the first time I heard this story some years ago, I assumed Ty was the victim of a hate crime. And to an extent, there's always some level of anger and hatred when it comes to any kind of murder. And Texas had been making headlines in recent years surrounding Ty's murder. In recent times, the statistics and the numbers are troubling. According to Forbes magazine, 320 gender-diverse people were murdered in the United States in 2023. Of them, 94% of them were women, and of them, 80% of them were Black. Considering that only 13% of the transgender community is Black, that is a staggering statistic. But as I've come into this case this week and I'm taking a closer look at it, I realize that this is a little bit different than that, according to Ty's best friend and roommate, Kenya. Because of them being Black and transgender, they are at risk disproportionately, and made that promise to each other that they have to inform the men that they're going to meet that they are trans. So Carlton knew, and he continued to see her. He wanted to see her. He just didn't want anyone to know. So it wasn't that this was a hate crime in the sense that Carlton was completely in the dark about Ty's gender identity, found out, lost it, and killed her. He knew. This was a different kind of hate. And Ty Underwood didn't die because Carlton got angry and this turned into a hate crime. Ty Underwood died because Carlton Champion hated himself. This had less to do with the fact that Ty was a trans woman and had more to do with the fact that Carlton had a fragile ego. During the interrogation, like I said, they're going to let Carlton know that they have all the messages with Ty on Kik that they exchanged. And they know based on the messages that Carlton had gone over to Ty's house and that they had been having a sexual relationship, and that they know that he doesn't want anybody else to know about the nature of their relationship because Ty was transgender. There are even messages from Carlton to Ty asking if she put pictures of them together on Facebook, that he messaged Ty about seeing pictures, she posted them on social media, and this made Carlton very upset, which was evident in their message exchange. The detective even had Ty's phone and showed him one of the pictures right there on the phone. I believe it's Ty's phone because it's in a plastic evidence bag. And they showed him an image that was sent to Carlton from Ty, and it's a picture of the two of them. And he's sitting there denying it's him, even though it's clear as day that he is the person in the picture with Ty that she had posted on social media. He's denying that it's him. It's right there. When the detective said, "It's you," Carlton denied that it was his Kik account. The detective said, "That's you." And Carlton smiled his stupid smile again and said, "Everybody makes fake pages, sir." The detective said, "Not like this. That's you and that's Tyrone." The dude just kept smiling, wobbling his leg up and down really fast. He was nervous. And he repeated, "Fake page and I'm hungry." Yeah. Carlton Champion is about to start asking for food. And that is exactly why I remember this case standing out. This guy, this piece of shit, sitting in this interrogation room. He looks kind of big and athletic, and he's in handcuffs and they're behind his back. And he's sitting there and he's leaned back. He's very relaxed and he's chill. He smiles throughout, and he's laughing and smiling and smirking throughout this entire interrogation. And just having to look at his stupid smile on his stupid face makes him very punchable. Carlton Champion actually thinks all of this is a joke. And as the officer brings up another question for him, he again tells the detective that he's hungry. This detective, he probably just couldn't believe the arrogance of this guy sitting here being questioned about a murder, acting like this. He tells him, "You should have ate at school." And then Carlton said, "Jail food is going to suck for the next ... He kind of trailed off. But the detective helped him out and said, "What, for the next 50 or 60 years? Yeah, it is. You believe me, buddy." Carlton replied, "I'm innocent, though." "If you're so innocent, then tell me, why are you meeting him on 25th Street? And for Carlton, it wasn't even the end of him asking for food during the interview when he said that. He would say, "I'm not hungry. I'm hungry as hell. I want Whataburger." I think he said something like, "You got no taste for Whataburger right now? Burger King, McDonald's?" He's asking the detective these questions. The detective was interviewed for the show on Investigation Discovery Murder Tapes. And he said in talking to Carlton in the interrogation room, the detective said, quote, "When I was interviewing Carlton, he knew he was at the center of our investigation at this point. And for his attitude to be smirking, to want me to go buy him some food, to be nonchalant, is not ordinarily how a suspect or a person being interrogated for a homicide acts." The detective confronted Carlton again about the message exchanges earlier in the evening, and it was clear from what Ty was saying that she wanted more from the relationship than Carlton did. Ty wanted to go public, Ty wanted him to be her boyfriend, and Carlton wanted to keep it quiet. Ty would send messages to Carlton saying that she was done with him, that he's a liar and this and that. And Carlton was mostly unresponsive or didn't really care or didn't respond the way that Ty had hoped or wanted. So Ty would end up that night deciding to just go over there and see him in person. And then apparently at some point, Carlton decided he was going to handle Ty one way or another. And when she started telling him that she was coming over there and demanding to talk to him or see him in person, Carlton eventually made up his mind to show up with a gun after telling Ty to meet him on 25th Street. The detective actually read the text exchange about that to Carlton, but all Carlton had to say was, "You're not hungry? I'm hungry." The detective replied, "Listen to me." Carlton replied, "I don't have to listen to shit you got to say." The detective, who was becoming aware of the implications of Carlton's attitude and the fact that he's being audio and video recorded, he again tries to get Carlton to listen, that he's going to be arrested for murder, but the problem is, Carlton, that this is your time to tell us exactly what happened because your DNA is gonna be in that car. You know it is. Carlton replies, I'm hungry, sir. The detective said, see, you think this is a joke, but you know what? You see this video? And he pointed to the camera right there in the interrogation room. When you go on trial, you know what the jury's gonna do? Look at you being a smartass, but somebody's fucking dead right now. Carlton replied, you're being a smartass. I want to get in my jumpsuit. You're being a smartass. I got nothing to say to you. Carlton never admitted to anything, which is fine. That's what we say the suspect should do, refuse to talk. But Carlton took this to the next level and just acted like a big jerk. He murdered Ty not even a day earlier, and he's laughing, wanting food and his county jail jumpsuit. The detective also warned him there on the spot that he was looking at as little as potentially 5 years for killing Ty, or to spend his entire life behind bars until he dies. And it would really come down to exactly what was happening in this interview. Yeah, there was a possibility that Carlton Champion could have only served 5 years for what he did to Ty, even though he deserved to pay with his life, at least life in prison. It wouldn't have been like that because of the circumstances. It seemed a little impulsive. They were arguing. There was a defense there for Carlton. There was an angle that an attorney could have used to defend his behavior. But it would really come down to what is happening in this interview room and his behavior, his attitude, even beyond this, even into the courtroom. And it's not just a lack of remorse, but it's a lack of any semblance of feeling or empathy or humanity. That's what's going to get Carlton Champion sent away for life, not killing Ty. He did this to himself. Carlton Champion did this all to himself. When the detective did the math and told him you can be there for as little as 5 years or as many as 99 years, and that's 94 years between those two potential sentences, and all Carlton had to say was, I'm innocent. Well, dumbass, just because you say it over and over again doesn't make it true. Just ask Leticia Stout, ask Teresa Stone, ask Sherry Papini. They'll tell you, no matter how many times you say it, doesn't make it any more true. But the detective ignored him when he said, I'm innocent. He said, so are you gay? And Carlton replied, no, I'm hungry right now. The detective repeated, are you gay? And Carlton answered, no, I'm not gay. The detective quickly asked, then why are you having sex with a man? And Carlton replied, I'm not having sex with a man. All of this, the way the detective is asking these questions is disrespectful and kind of rude, but I don't think he's trying to be that way necessarily. I think he's just trying to get under Carlton's skin. And I think Carlton is pissing this detective off with his remorseless nonchalantness, and the detective is reacting to that. And as Carlton sat there, he just came off as an obnoxious, arrogant asshole that just wanted to blow through these questions quickly so he could get on with his day, as if Ty was nothing more than a dead and distant memory. Carlton shimmied around in his chair because I'm sure sitting there with his hands behind him in handcuffs is super uncomfortable, but the smile and the smirk on his face quickly reminds you that this detective is in the company of a real life Texas-sized asshole. First class, first rate asshole. In fact, the prosecutor on the case said that the way that Carlton was behaving, his attitude, his detachment, and his lack of any kind of realization of just how serious this whole situation was, crossed the line into sociopathy. And I agree. This is not normal for people to behave this way. And Carlton Champion kept doing it. He kept acting like a jerk. Even as the detective told him, look, man, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to arrest you and I'm going to book you into the county jail for murder. Carlton's response, sir, I'm hungry. The detective fired back and told him to be quiet and listen. Carlton repeated, I'm hungry. But the detective kept going, I'm going to arrest you for murder. And Carlton said, I know what I'm here for, sir. And the sir isn't even sounding like he's trying to be respectful because this whole thing is a joke to him. Ty's murder was a joke to this man. Yeah, and he said, "I know what I'm here for, sir, okay, but I'm just hungry." And the detective said, "I don't care if you're hungry, be quiet." And to that, Carlton said, "God dang." The shitty attitude, the indifference was something that even the seasoned detective and other investigators on the case had never really seen before. And if they had seen anything similar to this, it was so unusual that they found it to be so disturbing sitting there across from this guy. The fact that Carlton is being told that he's about to be arrested for murder and all he can do is laugh and complain about being hungry. But it also makes it easy to believe that someone like that could carry out such a cold-blooded, violent murder. Laughing all the way, I guess. After a little more of Carlton's bullshittery, the detective was like, "All right, good luck to you," and he got up and left the room. Even though they were still working on their case, they didn't have all the evidence yet that they would eventually need to prove their case against Carlton. They were going to go ahead and hold him in custody because, oh, guess what? Lo and behold, what do you know? Dude's on probation from his previous bullshittery. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ty Underwood was murdered in January of 2015. Before the year was over, in the middle of December, Carlton Champion was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The jury deliberated for about an hour, so it didn't really take long. They probably just took a potty break and came back and were like, "Okay, let's go back." Ty's best friend and roommate Kenya attended some of the court proceedings and the trial, and she even said that Carlton's demeanor remained the same throughout. He giggled, he laughed, he just made a mockery of the whole entire process. Carlton Champion did not give a shit, and it showed. Kenya even said that Carlton, and I'm calling him Carlton because I don't like his last name Champion, so I just call him Carlton. She said that even his attorney had to nudge him or tap him on the shoulder to try to get him to settle down with the laughter, as well as to try to get him to stop slouching in his chair. Just the utter disrespect to everything and everybody that this guy showed. It was beyond what he did to Ty and taking her life. He wanted to laugh and joke at the whole system. To Carlton, this entire thing was funny. We're 10 years on from Ty's murder today as we talk about this case. More than 10 years, 10 and a half years. And I wonder if Carlton's stupid ass is still sitting in jail laughing. You know, the sad thing about this is the justice for Ty Underwood could have looked a lot different if Carlton had carried himself with a measure of respect and dignity. It really could have been a learning point. It could have opened up a conversation about tolerating people. You know, he didn't have to do this to Ty. He wanted to be with Ty, but it was his own perception of himself that he couldn't accept and deal with. Like I said, he didn't hate Ty, he hated himself. And considering in this case, he wasn't really facing life in prison because of some of the facts. An attorney may have been able to get him as little as 5 years in prison with a plea deal. But because of his arrogance and obnoxious mocking of Ty and Ty's family when he was being led away after he was convicted, he had one more thing to say, and the judge was like, "Okay, I'm done with this guy." As he was being led out of the courtroom, he said, "I'll be back on the streets." And shortly thereafter, he was sentenced to life in prison. So, no, you scumbag, you will not be back on the streets. You will be sitting in that Texas prison until you're ready to take your eternal dirt nap. And good riddance. And when he said that, when he said, "I'll be back on the streets," a voice in the gallery replied, "We look forward to seeing you." Unfortunately, whoever said that won't have the chance to encounter Carlton Champion on the streets. However, I hope they're resting comfortably at night knowing that Carlton is exactly where he belongs and he's there to stay. He's not going to have any Whataburgers, but I'm sure that there are still plenty of fish in the jail. And that is the tale of the deadly truth about hate, the murder of Ty Underwood. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for helping me make it to 8 years of California dreaming. And as always, until next time, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.